Okay, the next challenge is to do a glaze, to load the small kiln up for a glaze firing. There's not an enormous amount of stuff. I won't be able to do the big pot on the end here, that's just too wide to go in. And even in the big kiln, again, like I was saying about things being close to the elements at either end, there's always a risk that something like that will crack. But it survived the biscuit fire, which is good, and it looks pretty solid, so we might well be alright with that one. Looking at these, see what there is on the shelf. There's no enormously big pieces. There's a little bit of flat stuff, so I'll need a narrow gap between some of the shelves. But there's not a range of things. It's really good sometimes if there's a range of some little bits and pieces that you can slot in between stuff. But we'll see how we get on. It might all go in. It might not. Like I said, the jewellery's not going to go in because the metal rods that it's on will bend. At 1240 they will bend and everything will slide together and get stuck. So I don't want to do that. We'll have to get some rods that are going to stand the higher temperature than the ones we've got. So I'll get on with that and I'll show you what the first layer looks like before I put the shelf on. Looking at the work on the shelf, you're going to have to make sure that people have cleaned the bases. And cleaning doesn't mean just putting wax on it. If you put wax on it, the glaze doesn't stick to it particularly easily, but it still needs to be cleaned off. So you just have to check, because it is a real pig if you have to bash somebody's pot off the shelf. Looking at the height of this pot, it's about 3 1/4 inch. So what I'm going to do is put a 4-inch support in there and spread these around a little bit. There's 3 or 4 of them, so I'll be able to fill up the bottom layer quite well with those, and then put another shelf on and see what we've got left. So with the small kiln you only need 4 supports. You don't need one in the middle, so those go in around the edges. Tend not to put them right on the edge like I do with the bigger ones. Just bring them in a little bit. Okay. Now it's important when you're loading a glaze fire that glaze surfaces don't touch either each other or the shelf supports or the edge of the kiln. Alright, but what you can do is, I've managed to slip some tiles in. Because of the shape of the bowls, there's an overlap, and as long as you're careful and the bowl's not going to sag or anything, you can put tiles and smaller objects so that they are under the curve of the bowl. So that's the first layer done on there. I'm going to put a shelf on. Again, watching out for the thermocouple when you lower that in, and I'm going to have a look to see what else I've got. The other thing about when you're handling glazed work is you've got to be really careful not to damage the glazed surface. It can chip off edges really easily if you're not careful, and even though you can give it a rub over and try and cover the gap up, it's not that forgiving very often, and you will see it once it's been fired. So I'm going to put another shelf on, and then I'm going to put some fairly flat pieces on top of that, which should leave me just enough room for one more shelf. And I've got some stuff that's about between 3 and 4, possibly 5 inches, just to fill that top layer up. So I'll do a flat layer next, but I'm not going to be able to get everything in that's waiting to be fired, unfortunately. That's all I can get on the next shelf. A little bit disappointing. So what I'm going to try and do is see what I can get onto the top shelf, but like I say, not everything's going to go into this fire, I'm afraid. Okay, just about to load the final shelf. Just something to point out to you. This is the remains of somebody's pot from a previous fire, where glaze has run down onto the shelf, the pot's stuck and had to be broken off. Now that needs some backwash on top of it to try and stop other things sticking to it, but what I'm going to do today just to get this on is to avoid that space. Alright, so we've got about a 5-inch gap here. I will get a few of these pots in. Doesn't matter if things overhang that. Just have a shuffle around, make sure it's not touching. That's not going to go in. So it's just going to be a matter now of filling this top layer up with 1 or 2 tiles that have got glaze on them, and the other things will have to go back onto the shelf for another day. Just managed to get the horse's head in there, that fits really quite well, but something to watch out for is that as I've handled the horse's head, what I've now got on my fingers is a load of oxide which could end up on somebody else's pot. Again, you can give it a little bit of a rub. I'm not saying there's anything on this pot, but there is a little bit. But I will have to go and wash